In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. True connection begins when we choose to understand, not just to be understood. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcasts. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes: the art of human-centered communications, embracing diversity for business success, and how cultural intelligence shape the future of leaderships. Our guest today is Christa Uehlinger, an intercultural communications expert and founder of Linking People Circles. With decades of experience bridging cultural gaps in global business, Christa's mission is to help leaders foster genuine human connections. Her work reveals how embracing cultural differences is not just an ethical choice, but a powerful strategy for innovation and success. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Miss Christa Uehlinger, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sam. Thank you. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a pleasure to platform you, and I was able to dive into some of your work with a lot of interest, and so glad to be able to share a conversation with you on this beautiful Friday. To kick us off, tell us more about Linking People.
So Linking People is my company, and I created it 20 years ago, and a friend helped me to find a name, and so he was like, "What are you doing, Christa?" And I'm like, "I'm just like connecting people." And at that time, Nokia had the slogan "Connecting People," so that we couldn't use this one, and we used the Linking People. So that's what I actually do. I help people to understand each other, to connect human to human, which I think it's very important. And so I would say I'm an intercultural specialist. I'm communication specialist. I connect people, helping them to thrive across differences. And I'm offering my Linking People circles. We might talk about them later. So this is a circle where people meet and really apply and embrace diversity and differences, and of course, transfer it into business. And I'm also offering one-to-one coachings.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And talking about diversity, one of my favorite quotes about diversity is by Ola Joseph, which is, diversity is not about how we differ. Diversity is about embracing one another's uniqueness. When you're thinking about your work and specifically in the lens of that quotes, how important is this understanding in which we're all different people, but by embracing each other, the world will be a better place?
I think that could be actually my quote. I love it because since I'm a child, I'm interested in people. I've never could understand why somebody should be treated differently just because of a different color, skin color, a different approach, I never could understand. It's really interesting. So I was lately having a discussion about that. And I think each and every human being is so unique and so beautiful. And so it's just a matter of embracing it. And then, of course, it's this dilemma that if we meet and engage with foreignness, we react as human beings because we are challenged in our own worldview. And so that's kind of the dilemma. But if you open up, I think the world is just beautiful. So, yeah.
No, those are very powerful thoughts, and one thing that interests me about your story is just how second nature the love of people is for you. Where do you think that come from? This perhaps eagerness to better understand human beings.
I cannot actually tell. I just know that already as a child, I would say I'm very curious. also. So I'm very interested in people, their stories, the world. That's why I traveled so much. And I just see the beauty. I think I see the beauty in each person, and I always did. And I don't really, it doesn't really bother me where they're from or what they do and so on. So, and I have to say that also my parents, they were like raising me and saying, hey, there's actually no different. It doesn't matter if somebody is the CEO of a company or if there's the woman cleaning, they're all human. So I think it's both actually. So it just gave me this respect and yeah, but I think I'm also driven by my curiosity. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to dive a little bit about the roots of intercultural basically understanding for you. Obviously, when you dive into your journey, we're very right away, basically, I suppose, engage with you earning your PhD, obviously in law. And how was that? How was that process of you basically? First of all, did you go in law in the first place, and how was that to acquire a PhD in that industry?
I think actually where again as a child, I think at the end I wanted to be have different professions, but at one point actually I felt I would like to become a psychologist. So that's what I was actually considering it, but then my surroundings were like, oh, you won't make money with it, and only people who are mentally ill study psychology. So it's kind of this traditional approach. And then I tested myself and I figured out law is quite interesting too. So I studied law and I don't regret it at all. It helped a lot. But then I realized I just don't want to stay in this law world. I don't want to work as a lawyer. And then I moved into the international business settings. And I think one turning point was that I was in charge of, from one day to the other, I was in charge of 12 countries as the head of corporate communication. And that kind of brought me into, oh, wait a moment. So, the Italian don't really stick to the time. For instance, Spanish eat at 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. I'm used to eat at 7. And my Dutch colleague, very direct, things like that. And I started to realize, hey, that's actually beautiful because if we can understand why somebody behaves the way they do, we can better connect and even create innovative solutions. So that's what made me study intercultural communication in the US. So that
And yeah, absolutely. In many ways, basically, that's how you discover the transformative power of intercultural, basically, communications, right? The fact that you were interacting with so many countries, the fact that you were engaging in so many culture, was that difficult at first to be able to embrace that world, or that was always second nature to you?
that's quite second nature. Yeah, it was actually interesting because I just it was like, oh, interesting. So and I started to explore and I was talking to people and starting to realize, or I was reading or looking things up, and it came kind of naturally. So later on, actually, it was sometimes if you have a gift, you're not aware of it because it's so second nature to you. It's so normal to you. And so only by the feedback of people, for instance, one CEO later on told me, you were the only one understanding us. And we felt very represented by you at the head office. And I was like very grateful for this feedback because I just, from my perspective, I just did my job. And so over time, people gave me this feedback. Or another friend of mine, when I was coaching her team, which was really not working, and I just sat there with these guys and I was connecting them and I don't know what I did. I did my magic probably. And then suddenly they worked perfectly well. And she was like, hey, do you realize what you did? I'm like, yeah, I just did my job. And then she said, no, you didn't. Are you aware of your gift? And so over time, I received this feedback and I suddenly started to become aware of my gift and my passion in it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's very powerful. You talk about a human-centric approach at line, basically across all your materials. I will go as far as saying that it's at the core of your philosophy, kind of like what you call the art-to-heart communications. Tell me more about what that is and how can basically leaders and thought leaders embrace more and more of this heart-to-heart communication style.
Yes. Um, I mean, I was for over 15 years in business, so I kind of know this world. And as a lawyer, you are in this formal world too. And so I think we sometimes forget that we are human being, we are human. And especially also now with AI, everybody's focusing on AI and so on, but we are human. And I think that's very important. Um, Maintaining humanity and be aware of humanity. And so what I realized when I also started to work after I studied intercultural communication, I mean, I had the pleasure to work with big names in the field and to learn from them. And especially one guy who really took a holistic human approach and not like, hey, here, for example, here's a Chinese or a Mexican or a French or whoever, and that's a problem. People always address it as a problem. I see it as an opportunity, and so they point there, and then they say like, okay, tell me how I need to deal with it, with this problem. And so this was like, excuse me, that's not a problem there. That's a human being who is socialized in a different way than you are. That's very interesting. And then I realized, I mean, we interact in business to reach results and so on. And that's a human interaction. There's always two people, at least. And so oftentimes people forget, I had this call and there was a guy and he's a board member and he was like, I'm in the board of a Japanese company. That's really a problem. I don't know what they do. And then I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm sure they look at you as a problem too. So it was a bit provocative. And then he was like, um, no, why should they? So that makes me aware, and that's what I mean by human to human. It's a human to human interaction, and you can't take a tick the box activity to deal with other human being because everybody is so unique, and it's actually quite complex.
Right, absolutely. And one thought and concept that I love a lot is this understanding that any decision that are made are people in a place talking to each other. Very, very often we tend to disconnect from this because our ways of communicating now are very sophisticated, right? Over the phone, over Zoom, over this beautiful platform here. So all these things basically enables us to believe that we're too sophisticated to actually talk human being to human being. But at the end of the day, it never changed. It's always just people talking to each other. And I think that there's novelty in that. And one thing that you mentioned and you talk at length about, which I like to pick your brain, is technology connect us, humanity keeps us together. That's one of your quotes. And I love that quote a lot because I'm a firm believer in the same type of methodology. When you're thinking about this world now where AI and technology takes a bigger and bigger place, how how do you see it as a problem? Do you see it as a solution? Where do you position yourself towards it?
I think, I mean, I support AI and so on. I use it too. It's very fascinating. I look at it as a next tool. I mean, it's more than a tool, but I just now use this word. But what I find a bit alarming right now is that many people just focus on AI and processes and so on, and by that forget to think. You know, that's what I realize when I compare. I'm also teaching at the university. When I compare my students now compared to say 10 years ago, they don't think anymore. It's this. I really need to force them to question something. And so it's much more this way of, or they don't talk to each other during break. They take their phones and then they watch some, I don't know, TikTok and whatever. And so this human connection is missing. true human connection. There might be an indirect connection via the TikTok movie. And so that's what I realize. And at the same, I think people kind of really want to meet again, meet in a personal setting, which I also realize. So this online hype is a bit going back, partly sometimes. So it's forth and back. I think it's kind of a new opening. It's a new dilemma we're in, and it's a question on how to bridge it.
Makes sense. It makes sense. And specifically to that questions, I think it's very interesting for us to dive deeper into it. When you say that people don't think anymore, you remind me of my dad actually saying that, and it's something that is quite common. And obviously, we always had different generation interact in different ways. They have different slang and so on. So we understand that much. But I think that you're right in your assessments that now critical thinking has been basically replaced by convenience, by the fact that you can run the prompt on AI and they will give you a good enough answer to answer whatever basically question that you had, instead of yourself sitting down maybe with a few human beings and actually discussing it and trying to get to the best outcome. When you're thinking of your role at teaching at university, how important it is now to make sure that we harmonize the curriculum with a way, a methodology in which people keep interacting with people and not solely relying on technology for decision making.
I think that's very important, because I lately had a discussion with a friend of mine, and then we said, there is this notion of implementing processes. So the process is much more important, more and more in companies. And so sometimes it happened to me that I had a problem. I was contacting a company, and I was talking to a person, and this person then said, "Oh, I can't help because that's the process." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's the process. Okay, but here's a problem, So it's kind of, and this really makes me think, because everybody kind of ties in, does what they need to do based on process, or even based on answers from AI and so on, and it's like, yeah, just like the sheep. And I think that's alarming, because I think we need both. I mean, I'm nothing against sheep, but this is this uniformity kind of, and nobody really thinks. And I think there's so much in a human being we can offer to the world, but sometimes we need to, we need to think, and we need to take self-responsibility for our actions. And so coming back to your question, I think it's important even to educate our children and students on how to use AI, and also tell them, hey, it's not everything is true, For instance, if I tested it in intercultural communication, it's just you can't hardly use it because always the same answer come up. But I think that's at the moment, that's because humanity is a complex, and that's exactly the borderline where AI doesn't work.
Yeah, 100%. There's topics where I perform very well. There's other basically topics like anything towards empathy, obviously diversity and so on. That is getting better and better because it's getting trained on a worldwide basically models. But it's definitely something that will, in my opinion, never replace human beings. I think that our ability to see the world in an empathic lens come from our soul, and a soul is not duplicatable. And perhaps that's where I land on that question. One topic that you talk a lot about is unconscious bias, and specifically the gift of forgiveness, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful things that you go at length and discuss. I was able to explore some of your insights on your TED Talk, the gift of forgiveness, and how perhaps we can embrace cultural differences and transform basically challenges into opportunities. For you specifically, how can the leader better understand the power of forgiveness, but utilize forgiveness in a strategic way to basically be able to be have even more of a pulse on their people, and therefore optimize business results?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in my TED talk, I also talk about the gift of foreignness and then how to embrace it. And I think the first step is to realize that people are different. That's that might sound simple, but it's not. You know, if you're brought up in a way, that's your world, and that's the way you act and react and you behave, and you know how to do it unconsciously. So it needs kind of an interaction with somebody who is different to start to realize, oh, oops, there are people who are different. And then I think it needs openness, it needs curiosity, um, to start to explore these differences. And then I have to say also knowledge-wise, there are tools available, help supporting it. So that's what people oftentimes don't know. But then it's a development. So I mean, I still learn every day, so it's never ending. But it's a way, and once you start to realize, it's like it's always kind of the same recipe. It's like, okay, what's my approach? What's your approach? How can we explain this, and how can we bridge it? Easy said, hard to do, but um, and so once you start to get into this notion of, okay, wait a moment, here's the situation, for instance, a multicultural team, or this guy I mentioned who is a board member in a Japanese company, and you start to say, okay, wait a moment, I take 3 minutes, I'll have a look at it, what's going on here, and add this human piece to your business, you're going to be much more successful.
Beautiful. One quote that marked me was, "Forgiveness is not a wall, but a window. If only we choose to look through it." That's very clever. Can you walk me through some of how does that resonate, and perhaps give me a more lengthy definition to what you were trying to mean with that specific quote?
Yeah, I think that's to me a basic first decision you take. Is it a wall for you, or is it a window? Is it a window of opportunity? You know? And I could give you an example of a guy I just coached, and he was transferred from Switzerland to New York. And he was very successful in Switzerland, also leading people, leading teams. And then he arrived in New York and he realized it doesn't work the same. So that's oftentimes the initial position, you know. Now there are leaders who say, "I know how to do business, so who cares?" And they just do something, but they take the risk of also lose money, as there's a financial risk in it. And I can give you another example afterwards. And so this guy is like, "Hey, it doesn't work. I need support." And so he contacts me and I was coaching him, but he decided this is a window of opportunity, you know? And so I could coach him, and he also personally developed it. It's also personal development. So as somebody who says, I'm fine like I am, so that's probably not the best person for the intercultural work. But he really, by coaching him, he really developed. He always, I mean, I coach transfer oriented, so that we coach and he implements it in his business setting. Then he comes back next time, we'll work on it, and so on. So that's my method that I developed over time. But he really opened up, and within half a year, he managed his team in New York perfectly well. But he took it as a window, you know.
No, absolutely. You mentioned 1 year. Is that typical of a time frame to better understand a new culture, basically? How would you position yourself towards the fact that obviously that understanding will take time in order to fully endorse it?
Mm. I think, you know, as we are human, it's very individual. So some people are very open-minded and immediately implement. Others start to be a bit shocked by the foreignness and, oh my God, I don't know anymore, you know, because you are faced with ambiguity. You don't know anymore. Your way of working doesn't work anymore. So it's also a question, how do you deal with it? And so I would say after 2-3 months, it starts to work. And maybe after 6 months, that's why I offer coaching packages. After 6 months, yeah, depending on
So
people.
right, so it refines basically over time, but people get typically a huge leapway in help in 2-3 months. Okay, interesting, because I can see why foreignness is something that a lot of people have a problem to embrace. Obviously, either through xenophobia, that this fear of obviously the unknown, which is very typical in human beings, but also because quite frankly, and I was able to travel the world. We'll dive into you traveling the world as well. But it's very interesting to see how different places, even within a singular country, take the United States, for example, which is extremely one of the biggest countries in the world. You go from state to state, and it seemed like it's completely different environments. So people are certainly different, and there's beauty and there's novelty, but there's also some fear attached to that. Um, for you specifically, how do you position foreignness in such ways in which people see it in a beautiful kind of like rose lens of opportunity instead of that black wall?
Yeah, I think I always use examples on how you can turn the challenges into opportunities. And I try, I often also try to figure out where's the fear coming from. Oftentimes it's not the foreignness, it's attached to something else. So can we turn around this fear into something, or can we go step by step? What would be a first step to make you feel better, or what do you need, and things like that. And then as you travel too, I mean, some places just you feel at ease immediately. Others are a bit more are different. That's also a difference we have to deal with.
Yes, absolutely. And so when you're thinking about your travel journey, and some of the main differentiations between cultures and so on, would it be fair to say that there's also a locations basically based type of approach where, for example, within Europe, there's some rules in which apply to European in generals, or is it truly down to a village, to a state, to a much more smaller basically lanes, plot of land, excuse me. How do you, yeah, sure. Perhaps tell me more about just how big of a difference it is, even within one continent or one country itself.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because from far away, when you're in the US, you look at Europe and you speak about the Europeans, and we in Europe we talk about the American or the Asians. But my experience in intercultural work, if you want to tap into this potential of differences and similarities, you need to be very detail oriented. So you need to look at the finer traits. And so there's no such thing as a European or an American. As you said, in America, it's the regions. I mean, I've been to the Northwest, I've been to Pittsburgh, I've been to Boston area. So it's very different. And same here in Europe. I mean, even within Switzerland, we have the four different, and that's a small country that might be one of your states. So we have 4 different regions, we have 4 languages, and culturally it's just different. And so that's one learning I took away, because we tend also, especially in business, we tend to look at differences when the culture is very far, like from Europe to India or China, and people already start to maybe also look differently. And we get to consider these differences when we talk about the cultural distance, when the cultural distance is closer. And I give you an example, for instance, Switzerland and Germany, neighbor. And so we could say, oh, okay, it doesn't matter. But actually it matters. There are 2, 3 differences which have a huge impact on business. And one is that the Germans speak much more direct than Swiss. And so if the German go like, hey, bomb, the Swiss is like, oh, no, stop it. You know how disrespectful. And the other one is Germans tend to be much more hierarchical, so they much more tell you what to do, whereas these are on very same eye level, and we want to be included. That's our basic democratic approach. So for quite a while, I conducted workshop between Swiss and German managers, and was always the same. The Swiss were like, "Don't tell me what to do. I have an opinion too. I want to be included." And the German were like, "Hey, that's not efficient. We need to move on." So, and this is just a neighbor, you know. That's
Yeah, no,
one.
that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Why do you think that is, by the way, when you're thinking about how cultures are shaped? Obviously, we're talking about, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years in this case. But why, intrinsically speaking, why do you think there's such a wide difference between people, again, that look similar and live in similar fashion, perhaps in most cases? Where does that distinction comes from, you believe?
I think it's also the influence of history, geography. I mean, if you live far down in a valley, that's different than you live in a city, for instance. In Germany was a kingdom at one time, so hierarchy, whereas in Switzerland we have a totally different historical background. And so that shapes the values people share. And of course, I mean, culture is dynamic, it never stops, it changes.
It does. It does. And one thing that was fascinating about when I was reading some of your travel journey was tribal Papua, excuse me, where you went on this incredible trip, and I will let you explain it more deeply. But where basically they communicate without words, right? They don't have the same language nor a language period. Tell me more about that trip from start to finish, and how that nonverbal communication transcended basically
Yeah,
language barriers.
it was actually very, very fascinating because I just wanted to challenge myself and say, okay, let's go to a country I don't know. I don't know people. I don't know nothing about it. I don't know the language, and see how I react. Because I'm a person. I walk the talk, so I'm not sitting here in Switzerland and I'm telling people something about culture. And so I went on this. It was called a pioneer trek hike. And so we went into this Papua, and Papua is it's not Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a separate state, so it's the same island. But the western part is called Papua. It's part of Indonesia, and the eastern part is called Papua New Guinea, and it's an independent state. So I didn't know that either before I went there. And so we went in this because I'm very fascinated also by indigenous culture. I think it's very fascinating, their connection to nature and earth, spiritual, and so on. And so I thought, okay, I went on this hike where we went into this valley, where the tribes kind of live. And we had a local guide, and we have had about 4 porters, and they cooked for us and so on. And so there was one porter who helped me sometimes carrying my huge backpack. And with him, we kind of developed our own language within 4 days. And it was kind of sounds or a word, and we perfectly knew what we meant. And to me, this was such a touching experience because you realize oftentimes we say, okay, I can't speak the language, then I cannot understand people. But then there I realized this is this human to human connection, and you find a way to connect, and you find a way to speak to each other. So it was just fascinating, yeah.
Communication is not about word; it's about meaning, and that's and I don't recall the exact stat. Maybe you can, but I think it's something like 80% of communication is actually nonverbal, something around those lines, and it's to us specifically to younger generation like us, basically like me. A lot of people think that's what only matters is your words, right? Try to polish your communication when it comes to verbal communications, but then we miss so much of the little details basically around it, the tone, the speed of your voice, the way you pronounce things. It's all these things shape basically how people perceive you. But in basically in you being in a world, because that's a whole different world. Obviously, tribal Papua lived in such a distinct way from everything you ever come across. Tell me more about the adaptations of spending basically a few days with people in which don't even talk to communicate. How does that feel basically at the time?
Again, my curiosity. So I, I don't need a 4-star hotel. Of course, if I'm in one, I enjoy it. But I mean, on this trip, we were sleeping on the floor in a schoolroom or in a hut, and I had my mat and I had my sleeping bag and I had my pillow, and that's it. And so I realized, I mean, I enjoy this because it's a different way. It's a different way to connect to the place you are. And so to me, it wasn't that difficult. It was like exploring, and then okay, there were some moments where I was like, okay, or what's going on? Yeah, sure, that's part of it. But I much more enjoy to explore another place and connect with other people, and I was fine with it. But there were two guys in the group, and they just couldn't stand it. They dropped into culture shock.
Interesting. So they drop into culture shock. Interesting. What do you think that is?
Culture shock is our reaction, or that's kind of you acculturate to a new cultural environment, and so you react to it. So there are different reactions. I mean, these guys, they started to set up their tents in the schoolroom because they were afraid of, I don't know of what, but uh, so they set up the tent in this classroom where we slept on the floor, and to feel secure. That's fine. But one of them even didn't leave the room anymore because he was so afraid of the local people. So that's culture shock.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Did you see that often, culture shock, during your travels? How rare that is?
I also, I mean, that's something very important to know also in the business world, because if, for instance, you send around expat managers, you know, and you do not prepare them for the new environment, a lot of companies just send them, and I saw managers, they were in this acculturation process, or they were in this culture shock where and that has an influence on productivity because they're not able anymore to work because they're so caught up in this culture shock, you know. So I once met the manager. It was a woman. She was sent from Warsaw to Vienna, which is not far away, by the way, but it was her first time leaving her country and so on. So there always are different aspects. And she had a very strong culture shock. She lost 10 kilograms of weight and she lost hair, and she didn't leave her apartment after 6 p.m. And so she trusted me, and she opened up and she said, "This is happening to me. I don't have a clue what's going on. I don't recall myself." And so I said, "I know what you're going through. You go through this acculturation process. That's your reaction." And so I coached her through. And then she said, "I'm so very grateful because I wasn't aware of it. Would I have? I could have dealt with it."
Right, right. And this is interesting, and I think we can reflect on this quite deeply when you're saying about the fact that it was, her first time that she went outside of her typical environments, and therefore had some type of culture shock associated with that. Is it fair to assume that the more you go outside of your comfort zone, the more you go outside of your environments, the less that culture shock is basically typically happening? Or tell me more about the synergy between how often you're in discomfort compared to culture shock that might be happening.
Yeah, I think it's again very individual. So but it's very fascinating to observe. So I can give you another example. I saw another manager. He was sent from Switzerland to Central Eastern Europe, but he was not the first time abroad. So he had some experiences. But being there, and he dropped into this culture shock too. And he didn't leave the flat after 6 p.m. and he said I can't find the food I'm used to and things like that. So you can tell that daily things like food and so on suddenly have a huge importance. Or another one who also, by the way, already had some international experience. He started to shower 8 times a day because he find it so dirty. And and things like that can happen. And in my own experience, I much more have a so-called re-entry culture shock once you're coming back. So I react much more stronger when I'm back home.
Interesting. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about your own kind of like inner journey of self-discovery through cultural exploration, um, I want you to tell me quite philosophically, if you can, when you're thinking about your how your own understanding of yourself as obviously deeper in your capacity to connect with others, how does that liaison perhaps balance itself, and how can one basically better harmonize towards basically better understanding the world through themselves?
I think, I mean, I'm on my self-discovery journey for many years. I would say I'm on a spiritual path here. And I just realized the more I connect to myself, to my soul, or however you call it, to your inner, um, the more I let go of certain pains I experienced, or we all carry things, The more I let go to it, the more I reconnect to myself, the more open and the more grounded I am.
Interesting. You said something quite clever, which is the more we understand ourselves, the more we understand the world. Why do you think starting with basically you as a person prior to trying to get in the wildness of just how different the world is so important?
I think so. In my programs, be it in my coaching program or my circles, I always start with people themselves. There is a matter of, from a cultural perspective or intercultural work, it's because we are not aware of our culture, because we embodied it. So we kind of need to reconnect to it and become aware of what are, for instance, some of my values, which then show up in my interaction. Because this allows us to better see the differences and commonalities with the other person. So it's always mine and the other. It's not just the other. And so that's important. And then it's also, and then suddenly, sometimes in these journeys, fears pop up or things like that. So, or blockages we have. And then I realized you can't really distinguish it from, is it my personal story or is it culture? It kind of it's kind of intertwined. And so it's so important to just become aware of and self-reflect and also see, okay, what's going on here and how can I solve it and move forward. And for instance, in my psychosynthesis studies, there is this nice saying, as within, so without. And I think that's really kind of a guiding principle to me. And that's why the more you know yourself, the more grounded you are, uh, the more open you can be, and it's not dangerous or whatever, So it's different.
I love
It's a
that.
different place.
I love that. Absolutely. When you're thinking about what you do with thinking people circles and kind of like turning theory into practice, which is very important. I'd love if you can unpack some of your practical methodology for leveraging cultural diversity and truly to solve workplace challenges on a business setting. How can a business now thrive by basically emphasizing empathy, active listening, curiosity? Tell me more about that methodology of yours.
So I just realized, there are these, I call them traditional approaches on one day training about Chinese culture, something like that. And I don't believe in it because as I said before, I take a holistic approach. I see the human to human interaction. So it's not enough. It's a process. So what kind of the methodology I developed is like input, kind of knowledge. Then you implement it into your daily business. You see how you react, what's going on. You bring it back. We'll talk about it. We analyze it. You have a next step. You have a solution. You implement. You come back. So it's kind of this circle. And then I realized when I was working with people, for instance, in 1 day or 2 day trainings, I mean, I did them too. It's like, okay, they said at the end, Christa, and now what? And then I realized, implementing it's much more challenging. You can sit in the room, you can listen to Chinese cultural, whatever, or American culture or Swiss culture. It's kind of people go like, yeah, okay. And then once you implement, you realize there's no black and white. It's so much depending on the situation you're in. And so you need to develop also skills and so on. So in my circle, it's really like, okay, here we are. Then we do a deep dive into a topic, and then we meet again 2 weeks later. And meanwhile, it was implementation phase. So people bring back their questions, their situations, and so on. We solve them. They have a solution. They can implement it, and so on. So it's this circle. And this is a process. I truly believe it's a process. It's a developmental process. It's not just as I said, one size fits all, and here's it is, and that's the way you do it. It won't work.
Yeah, you're very much against the cookie cutter. You're holistic practitioner, which I really much appreciate, and we believe the exact same things in whatever you're doing now. The world is so diverse and so hyper connected. You need to be customized. You need to be personalized to the people's need, wants, challenges, and so on. It is so important. One thing that I've read recently, which I don't recall the author, was empathy is the bridge between culture, but curiosity is a key to crossing it. Which I think was very, very interesting and very, very deep, perhaps, and meaningful. When you're thinking about curiosity, you mentioned it already 3 times in this conversation. It's true. You love curiosity, and I think that's a beautiful thing about yourself and every other people that cultivate that skill sets. Um, how can you stay curious for the duration of your lifetimes? Obviously, as we know, children are obviously very curious because they have such a misunderstanding and such a very loose grasp of reality. Therefore, everything's new. But when you're getting to a point where you have a decent understanding of the world, of yourself, everything or surrounding yourself, how can you still be as curious and as passionate towards what you want to be curious about?
That's a good question. If I look at myself, I'm curious until I die, because that's just me. I mean, I can walk through the streets. I'm very good at observing because I'm just interested on what's happening. And then sometimes I say, hey, did you see? And then people go, what? Where? Oh, no, I didn't. And I see that I don't know, I observe, I also sense the thing. So it's not only visual. Yeah. And so, yeah. And so I'm kind of open-minded and I just, yeah, fascinated by what's going on around me.
Sure. No, you strike me as a lifelong learner. Strike me as somebody that every day you're trying to learn something new, be curious about something new. And that's very, very powerful. What are some of your practical tips perhaps for people to be more curious and wants to get out there and trying to not only achieve whatever they want to achieve, but understand just how important curiosity is as a component of that success?
I think I would suggest to take a moment, sit on the bench, and just observe what's going on around you, and do it like, playful. So figure out what's going on, write it down, what you can see, um, and so on. Because especially in the business world, we don't do this anymore. And I think people think they are efficient, but I think the longer, the more that they actually are not really efficient. You know, I mean, you have what I observe is nowadays you're on your smartphone, you're on your laptop, you are distracted everywhere. You think by one Teams call, it's done. It's not. So again, the human to human connection and focus I think focus is missing. And so that's very interesting too. So
It is. It is very interesting, and it's interesting what you mentioned as well concerning the fact of pausing. Right? There's this interesting quote by Dr. Richard Chambers, which is something around the lines of, "Life's move pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you might miss it." And it's it is very nice. It's something to really think about because again, we live in such a, especially in the Western culture, we live in such a performance based world that typically it's always about doing more, making more, striving for more. But very very few people actually take the time to sit down, pause, reflect, and say, you know what? Maybe I'm not satisfied, but let's be happy of how we were able to accomplish everything we're able to accomplish. And there's a part of that that is very humble, but there's a part of that I think comes with leadership, this understanding of just, hey, we're striving in that directions, we're making progress towards that direction, but then having some milestones where you can celebrate with yourself and with your team and with the world is so key. When you examine basically how leaders can foster inclusive environments and truly try to recognize and respect cultural differences within their teams, what's typically the best format basically to do so? Let's say that you're a small business, but you already have some international clients, international employees. Is there any rules of thumb based business wise that you can just try to apply and be conscious and intentional towards that?
I think it's really what you just said about also pause now and then and reflect on what's going on. It doesn't need a lot of time actually, because I realize people always think, oh, okay, I need to reflect, I need to sit on I don't know, meditate and sit on a cushion and things like that. But actually, I would say 5 minutes, and then reflect on what's going on and what can I observe, behaviors and so on, and how can I bridge this? How can I use it to be more effective at the end?
Right. And
And I
like you
think,
said,
sorry, yeah, I think that's very important because we are, especially in the Western world, we run. We have a goal we want to achieve, we run. And the older I get, I realize it's much better or not, yeah, much more effective, it's probably the better word, to now and then pause, stop, look at it. And when I work with my people, I'm always say, okay, stop. I actually ask them to stop. And at the beginning, they are like, oh, yeah, but, and I said, stop, look at it. And that's a different approach, but it's very rewarding after a while. At the moment, it might be a bit uncomfortable, but I think that's very important, also as a leader, or especially as a leader.
right. It's rewarding and it's calming. And it doesn't need to be a full hour meditation sessions. For some, it might be 5. For others, if it might be breaking up basically to 10, 30, and so on. Personally, I try to meditate at least 15 minutes a day. That's my schedule. If I can go to 30, I will go to 30. But it's no, but it's interesting because there's this interesting concept as well of interconnectedness between focus and calmness. What we know from obviously from stress and cortisol specifically is as soon as you jack up your cortisol rates, not only are you less intelligent, that's scientifically proven because the blood flow basically goes from your frontal lobe all the way to the back of your neck, and that basically creates a stressful environments where you think less, you reflect less, and therefore are way less clever, witty, and everything else that you want to be in business. um, I really encourage, and I'm sure that you do as well, any leader to strive as hard as they can. That's always the most important things. And obviously, we understand that performance based, basically metrics, but also to take some time to pause, reflect, refine. And sometimes what we've been seeing is one step basically behind actually give us two, three leaps in front when you do it
Absolutely.
properly,
Yeah.
right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I actually started a new service kind of together with another leadership coach because we realized people are like running, running, running and burning out. And we both, in the cultural, if you calm, it's much more effective, as you just said. And also, so we started an initiative called Press Pause. So we started half a year ago, and all we do is we offer a space where people uh, can join, and we are just silent. We do nothing,
Oh, interesting.
and it's fascinating what's going on.
So you just share a silence.
Silence. hmm So we started to do, we're just still testing it a bit,
Right, right, right.
and then we started to do online free, like try it out thing,
Right,
and
workshop, yeah.
it's so fascinating because okay, there's a bit hesitant to join first. It's a bit strange.
It's no, it's different. It's different for sure.
So it's a bit, yeah. That's the question we have right now. How to best market it, but that's another one. That's always in a business endeavor. And but it's fascinating. It's like last time we had 5 people, and then we give an introduction, and then we are silent for at least 15 minutes.
Wow, 15 minutes. I'd say that most leaders and most people that I come across have a hard time with 15 seconds of silence.
And then we invite people to say, okay, how was it? If you want to share something, please share. If not, that's fine too. And so oftentimes they share and say, oh my God, my thoughts and so. But then they realize the benefits already after 50 minutes. It's so fascinating. And then we dive again for 15 minutes. We say, okay, another round. And so now we have the first people coming back because they also say, hey, I joined twice or 3 times. It really is beneficial, you know. So it helps me stay calmer and focused. And that's what we want to achieve. It's fascinating.
It is. It's so beautiful. So beautiful. And truly, and one thing I'd love for you to tell me more about is what I found is typically, and that's actually Leonardo da Vinci said this, which is the highest level of sophistication is simplicity. It's so interesting to see how the world now is so focused on complex ideas, which is actually fantastic. I am much more focused on complex idea than simple ones most of the time. Yeah, exactly. It's just the way it is. But it's one thing that always strike me as so incredible, specifically in human beings, is how very simple, basically change of behaviors. Like for example, taking 15 minutes of your day in silence, right? If you're woke up 16 hours, let's say on 24, and you take basically 15 minutes of your journey to do that. How simple is that? That's very simple. That's very minor, but yet nobody teaches that. So we continue this loophole of basically doing what we know how to do, which is just to work harder, and therefore we just work harder until we can't, and therefore burn out. And do you believe that there's a societal pressure as well now more and more to work continuously, and therefore that's why people play this this game of just working the hardest as possible?
Yeah, I think so. It's also socialization, it's the society, and we have the pressure from there, and yeah. And interesting. So now I'm going to be very honest. My friend and I, we started this initiative, and we were both in the corporate world, so we know it. And then we are afterwards we always debrief and so on. And at one point we said, do we offer enough? That was so fascinating because we realized we are also, you know, based on society and business culture. We were like, okay, I need to give and do and serve and so on. And so the moment I just, not just, we give the space to people to just be. And then we have the reaction of, is this enough? So that was very fascinating.
It is, it is. And I love this
Yeah.
tagline, by the way, just be. Because we're so prone basically to do, right? We're collectively prone to do a lot, but just being is a very interesting novel concept that I think needs more explorations. One thing that is fascinating to me, and I'd love for our audience to get some direct values and benefits from listening to these conversations, is for you, obviously, you work with dozens, not hundreds of leaders now, that are in different places of the world, different places business wise, different cultural obviously settings. But what are some practical tips that there is? I wouldn't say that that obviously apply across the board. As we said, it's a very more kind of like customizable process. But what are some basically practical tips, actionable basically advice that our listeners can basically take on how to improve their internationality and I suppose their intercultural skills through self-assessments, curiosity, and openness? Can you share a couple of tips that might be helpful for beginners?
Yeah, first of all, it's kind of a decision, business wise. If you want to take these chances, or if you don't want to take them, if you want to take the chances, and also, because it's still sometimes in the business, it's like, okay, here's a soft factor, but that's touchy feely, and we don't need it. So that's kind of the first thing. Say, okay, I want to include this in my business journey to be more successful, to be more effective. And then go from there and say, okay, what do I need for that? You might need some basic knowledge helping you to understand faster in situation. Um, I really would say always now and then take a moment to reflect on the situation you are and learn by that. Was there a barrier? How can I overcome it? And so on. So it's a continuous thing. Talk to people who already were managing wherever they were managing, so that helps too. And stay curious and open-minded. And especially at one point in my career, I realized that I can prepare myself as best as possible. I can think it through several thousand times and think that way to go, and it might totally not work out. And it has nothing to do with you. It has to do that you are interacting with somebody who is culturally different. And so that helped a lot. And so then I learned to see, okay, it's actually not my fault, because oftentimes we start to blame ourselves, but it helped me to say, okay, again, stop, look at it, what's going on here, and learn it and move on. So yeah, it's this step-by-step thing.
Great communication starts with a willingness to learn from others. That's always what a thought that I try to keep in the back of my mind, because we're so only in now on this idea of me, myself, and I, and an independence, and I could do it all. And it's I think there's tools that help us do that, and I think that increase productivity. But at the end of the day, we are human beings, and therefore need to interact with each other. When you're thinking about building a legacy of connections, one of the leaders I love to follow is John Krasky, excuse me. I don't want to butcher his last name, but he has this fascinating book about the future of community. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a very yeah, you should absolutely. The future of community, you can find it on all platforms, and it's a very interesting book, basically talking about what he thinks the community will look like, basically in the future. He talks about blockchains and his understanding of value driven communities. Very fascinating book. But from your perspective, I'd love to wrap up with your vision of what basically the future holds for interconnectedness and intercultural communications, because for me and my understanding of your journey, to you, it's not just a skills, but it's a way of life. How do you see that unfold as times pass?
I strongly believe that we kind of, and I'm not the only one. I mean, there are books out there and articles and so on. I strongly believe that we move into kind of a new era where connectiveness is just togetherness is important, and not this me, myself, and I. And I mean, from a spiritual aspect, we know everything is connected, so it's we just try to change it as humans. And I think that that's the new way of being connected and live connectedness. And to me, there it's really this human to human approach, the heart to heart connection, which is very important. And I think that's my vision. And I think that's my vision also I started to live with my circles. And then I hope that will have a ripple effect into the world. I think that that's the way to go. And as long as we, if we fight each other and so on, to me, that's the old way. And unless we learn to really connect, then there are new possibilities and so on. But as long as we fight each other, it's still, we won't move.
Beautiful. A connected world is not built by chance, but by choice, one conversation at a time. Christa Uehlinger, was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcasts with such an interesting and thoughtful conversations. I'd love if you could share some of your last word with our audience, please.
When we were talking, it was a pleasure too, Sam. I could go on and on. Fascinating talking to you. When we were talking, I'm a very huge fan of Edward T. Hall. He was an American anthropologist. He's called the founder of the intercultural field, so the father of the intercultural field. And he lived in the last century, and he took a very holistic approach, and he came up with ideas which nowadays are proved by neuroscience. So very thought leader. And he at one time, of course, at that time we didn't have Teams and Zoom and so on. One of his quotes I like is, behind every piece of paper, there is a human being. And I think that's a very nice quote summarizing kind of what we talked. We might have to say behind each Zoom or Teams or email, there's a human being. But I think that's a very nice quote stating what we discussed together. So thank you, Sam.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.